Yeah, I probably grew up like most Christian kids, you know. Went to church almost every Sunday, learned the books of the Bible, that kind of thing. I know all the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not steal, honor the Sabbath, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not commit adultery, honor your father and mother, take the Lord's name in vain, murder, graven images. That's the 9 Commandments. Yep.
In 2008, a documentary film crew followed the journey of one college freshman and captured actual footage of a reenactment of his first day of classes.
You're clearly intelligent people. That's why you're in college. Biologist Richard Dawkins has said, and I tend to agree with him, that people who don't believe in evolution are either ignorant, stupid, or insane.
Ethnocentrism and the myth that our moral values are far superior to the rest of the world's
The
culture.
Salem witch trials, Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, and today we're going to talk about Christianity's body count down through the ages.
What they found
This morning, you are going to meet one of your closest relatives.
was shocking. In a world ruled by people who don't value the values that your mother valued.
We're going to talk about how we determine the difference between right and wrong. So who'd like to have a go at this? How do you make that determination, Mr. J?
One man was ready for them.
Well, you could refer to teachings such as the 10 Commandments.
You don't propose that it'd be right for you to impose your religion on someone else, do you?
Jay was not that man. Based on actual events.
It's all pretty realistic, except I guess I didn't walk to college. Looked really cool, though. Yeah, not being prepared, wouldn't recommend it.
My biggest challenge in college was definitely the professors.
I mean, right out the gate at college, I had a bunch of pretty crazy professors.
Even living in the Bible Belt in the South, everything was liberally slanted.
I would say that my college experience has had times where I just completely doubted everything I was taught. Just could have given it up, thrown it out the window.
I had a medieval history teacher who basically stated at the beginning of class that he hated Christianity, and that's the only reason he taught the class.
In my freshman year, I went to biology. And the first day, our teacher said that he believed in evolution, creationism was stupid, and that Christians were stupid, and that if you believed in a God, that, you know, you're basically unintelligent.
For the first time, I had to not only deal with my professors, but also all these students who I was living with who didn't share my worldview at all. I was the only conservative and the only Christian I knew.
My first semester, my freshman year, I was enrolled in a philosophy class that was critical thinking, and it very much took God out of the picture because that was our teacher's personal opinion and view.
I was very surprised when I went to college at how shaky my Christian background was.
Even though I was at a Christian university, though, that didn't mean that my teachers are Christian.
When you have a college that advertises its mission statement with Christian values in it, the last thing you expect to hear in a classroom is that if you believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, that you are ignorant.
Christian colleges can be very dangerous because you go and there's so many different theologies, it shakes your faith completely.
I think that the biggest challenge for me was a Bible class that I took, and I had one of the most liberal teachers at my college. Everything that he was teaching me like shattered the foundation that I had been taught, which you wouldn't think would happen at a Christian school, but it does.
And so I found myself debating in my head, you know, what to believe, and kind of having to really focus on developing my own foundation.
I remember feeling very ill-equipped for certain issues dealing with the Bible. A lot of my professors, they were very intellectual people, so they knew the Bible back and front.
I was friends with people who just completely gave up. Like, I don't know what to believe.
When presented with some of the evidence that the world has come up with to defy God, it scared me how convincing it was.
I was not prepared because I hadn't learned about everything else that people believe. I was not prepared to hear all the different views that could be presented.
During my senior year, our big assignment in the social work department is an advocacy project. And I was really excited to do this, but the disappointment came when my professor asked our class to do a group assignment where we didn't get to choose what we were doing, but all of us had to lobby for the same issue. Unfortunately, that issue was to lobby for homosexual foster and adoption. And my heart just sank. This was an issue that I personally couldn't stand behind, and I knew that as part of this assignment, I would have to sign my name to a letter saying I did support this. I knew right then that I had to ask my professor for an alternate assignment because I wanted to get a good grade in the class. His first reaction was, no, you don't have a choice. And so I was forced over and over throughout that semester to talk about my beliefs and why I couldn't do this in front of my peers. As the semester went on, I completed each part of my assignment up until the point of signing my letter. When I didn't turn that in, he was really upset. Well, I set up a meeting with the director of my program. She suggested that we sit down with my professor and talk about the classroom assignment. I thought, wow, something's actually going to change. Apparently, in between me talking to her and my next class period, the two of them had had a discussion and they decided to throw out the entire assignment. So he came into class very upset, threw out our papers and said he couldn't grade them, handed us a new syllabus, and told us to start over. We had spent all semester doing research, and to think that we had to start over with only 1 month left. I knew that everyone in the classroom knew it was me. And now here, in the last month, they're having to start all over. About 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from my department head saying that the faculty had filed a level 3 grievance against me. So as I'm going through my finals week, stressed out to no end on the class material, but also having to think that I have to face a grievance committee at the end of the week. Then came time for the meeting, and I had asked if my parents could attend with me, and they said they would get back with me, but they didn't until we actually arrived. And at that point, I was informed that they weren't going to be welcome. Some of the very first questions out there were, could you not do this assignment because you're a Christian? Do you think that you're a sinner? Do you think any of us sin? What about homosexuals? Do they sin? Is that why you can't do this assignment? And so if both you and homosexuals are sinners, then what's the difference? Why can't you advocate for them? Tough questions. And it almost starts to make you question what you believe. And was I wrong? But I knew I wasn't. They handed me a contract, about 2 pages long, saying you will do this, you won't do this, you're gonna have to do these extra things. And if it wasn't signed, then I wasn't going to be able to start my last semester. I'd worked 4 years, and here I am in my last semester, and they're not gonna let me continue. And so I signed it and turned it in, knowing that I was going to be watched, and knowing that at any moment, if I failed on any of those points, that they could withhold my diploma.
I had this one teacher my freshman year
really seemed like he took personal enjoyment out of singling out Christians in the classroom. My response to that was to become almost painfully sarcastic. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that necessarily. Somehow it didn't occur to me that the person I was mocking was going to be determining my grade. That didn't really work out for good old Jay in the end there.
A lot of those forces that exist on the college campus are forces that really apply to every student, whether you're talking about a Christian student or a non-Christian student. All of those pressures will pretty much be felt by them. The Christian student, however, is going to feel another kind of pressure, and that comes from the pressure to conform to a different kind of a worldview that is contrary to the Christian worldview.
One of the reasons to study worldviews is to get a clear understanding of your own thinking. But another reason to study worldviews is to be able to perceive and understand what other people are thinking, because everybody has a worldview. And many students going into colleges and universities assume that teachers are up there lecturing and just telling them the facts of a discipline. And they don't realize that the teacher has a perspective. They have a worldview, they have a bias, they have an interpretation that influences what they're teaching, what the take-home message of it is. And so students will often too willingly simply take everything down in their notes and study it and not analyze it critically to distinguish the facts of a discipline from the presuppositions that a professor might be bringing to the teaching of those facts.
One kind of professor that you have to be careful about has a worldview, and he admits that he has it, and he slams you over the head with it. And he says, look, matter is all there is. I'm a scientist, man, and science has proven there's no God. It's not always that crude, but sometimes it is. There's another kind of professor that you have to watch out for, who also has a worldview, but he pretends that he doesn't. He says, I'm not giving you any view here. I'm not telling you any philosophy. I'm above all that sort of thing. There's no bias in what I'm saying. I'm just being neutral. I'm giving you the facts. But of course, the way that he's giving you what he calls the facts is influenced by his worldview, and it might be distorted.
There's tremendous psychological pressure on students to conform. Any student who stands out and says, I disagree, immediately comes in line for some social pressure, or at least there's certainly worries about being the odd man out, and looking weird in front of your friends.
I definitely had a lot of good professors. There were those few weird ones. There's some kookers. I just thought it'd be kind of interesting to see what some of these guys do in their spare time. Yeah, I wouldn't guess that a lot of them were your regular church-going folk, per se.
Hundreds of disability rights activists showed up today at Princeton University to protest the hiring of controversial philosopher Dr. Peter Singer as its new professor of bioethics. Dubbed by critics Professor Death, Singer has drawn fire from the disabled community for suggesting that it can be ethical to kill disabled infants.
University of Colorado Professor Ward Churchill has sparked an uproar for comparing the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attack to Nazi war criminals. Professor Churchill has also called for war crimes trials to prosecute American military officials and businessmen for their, quote, crimes against humanity.
Is he an eco-terrorist or just plain misunderstood? University of Texas zoologist Eric Pianka now says that comments he made about using the Ebola virus to wipe out most of the human population were misinterpreted. But the noted lizard expert still maintains that the Earth would be a lot better off if up to 90% of its human population was eliminated. And he urges the government to raise taxes on any family with more than 2 children.
When I was a freshman, I actually had a teacher who loved Ward Churchill. It's like his favorite person in the world. So I had to write a paper commenting on one of his essays in which took it upon myself to take the opposite point of view. I thought I did a pretty good job, you know, proving my point. Definitely got a C- on that one.
The overriding fact of modern academia is that the professorate, the people teaching and doing research in academia, are pretty uniform in their commitment to a secular, materialistic worldview.
About a quarter of all college professors identify themselves as atheists or agnostics, far more than the general population. And when you go to the really elite schools, it's a lot more than that. It's more like 40%. And when you go to disciplines, particularly in the social sciences and natural sciences, it's even more than that. For example, in psychology and biology, basically more than 60% of professors identify themselves as atheists or agnostics. And more than half of all college professors say that they regard the Bible as a book of fables and legends. And at elite universities, it's more than 70%. Sometimes people claim that the reason college professors are overwhelmingly more secular is because that's really what you learn after you look at the evidence. And so this is just what the best and brightest people conclude. People who argue that really don't understand how college professors get to be professors. It's a self-selecting guild. And when you go through the process of hiring, there are litmus tests. And if you don't meet the views that your colleagues have, you won't get hired. Or if you do get hired and then they find out later, you won't get tenure and you'll end up being booted out.
I was denied tenure in 2007 because of my work on intelligent design. And I went through a number of appeals, and the final decision came down in February of 2008, and so I had to leave Iowa State University.
University officials at Iowa State University claimed that the denial of tenure to Guillermo Gonzalez had nothing to do with intelligent design. Guillermo Gonzalez is an outstanding research scientist who's helped discover 2 new planets, co-authored a science textbook with Cambridge University, has had his work featured on the cover of Scientific American, but he wasn't good enough to get tenure at Iowa State University. It's because he dared to point to the evidence in nature that shows it was the product of intelligent design, not just chance and necessity.
One of the ironies of modern academia is that many folks in the professorate present themselves as very open-minded, liberal in the classical sense, open to all ideas. But in many, many disciplines, especially where these controversial worldview subjects enter in, the students are not exposed to competing perspectives. Or if they are, it's a very narrow range of competing perspectives.
There is actually a hostility towards a Christian worldview. I've had the opportunity to talk to lots of Christian college students of how they are belittled, how they're harassed, how they were made fun of. That doesn't happen in every classroom, but it does happen.
When you first get to college, suddenly it'll just hit you. You have the power to make all of your own decisions. There's definitely not a shortage of opportunities to make bad choices.
Whatever you could uncover, secretly in high school is much more public in college.
You just get all this peer pressure because people just want to party, drink, and do drugs.
Our apartments had a dry policy that they pitched to the parents when you're coming to take a tour. Yes, we're real strict on alcohol consumption, and there's no drugs allowed in the complex, et cetera, and they try and pitch it as like this really safe environment for the kids. But once you get there, the complete opposite is actually what happens to be the reality.
When I first arrived at college, I started right out in the fraternity setting.
First night was this house party. It was very interesting. Lots of alcohol, lots of booze, lots of drunk people.
There's drinking, drugs, people were smoking pot, and there's ecstasy.
A couple fights happened that night.
The police came numerous times.
But it was very chaotic.
And the scariest thing was waking up the next morning and not remembering about 11 hours of my life.
The most intense persecution that I felt was in the social scene. Saying to me, have another beer,
see if you can take that girl home over there.
My roommate was very active with the boys.
Lots of sexual contact, I guess, goes on.
I think that was one eye-opening experience, was having just random people stuck in your apartment with you and often bringing boyfriends over and stuff like that.
I woke up about 5 o'clock in the morning and was staring at a ponytail of my girlfriend at the time, and it scared me. I literally sat there in bed for 2 hours going, what in the world happened?
People like to smoke, lots of pot in my school.
Across the hallway, there was a group of guys that sold a lot of weed.
This one guy would be like rolling joints in the TV room of our dorm.
On one side of me was a guy who did a lot of weed.
I'd never met people like that before.
It was supposed to be a solid Christian university. It really wasn't. Girls I was living with in my dorm were having abortions and getting wasted on the weekends and having to, get let into the dorms late at night, and serious issues with depression and cutting and stuff I just really didn't expect. I mean, you're at a Christian university, for Pete's sake. Like, it's not supposed to be that way.
Part of me thinks that on a Christian campus, the moral dilemmas are almost more serious. I think that the parties that people threw were more crazy.
I watched many friends fall away from their faith, and many friends just become more accepting of the world's view of tolerating sin and of accepting worldviews that were not biblical.
So yeah, I fell into a pretty sinful life, and I got really depressed and lonely. And
I had several friends who I just could not believe by the end of their senior year compared to how I knew them as a freshman.
And so it was really hard for me to find Christian friends. I'm a lone island, like I'm the only Christian here, and it was hard because I didn't have any support.
My experience was clearly defined by the friends that I chose.
Just watching people who I thought were my friends, they would sacrifice our friendship in order to satisfy an addiction.
I think if I would have surrounded myself with better people that were more, Christian, I think that would have helped a lot.
All of these forces begin to just boil around them. The loneliness, the wanting to fit in, the attacks on their belief system, the pressures to conform, and then all of a sudden that desire to feel significant in a campus of 10,000 students. They find themselves now at a party, they find themselves for the first time now drinking that they may have not done before, and then the next thing you know, this young girl is sitting in a corner of her bathroom weeping because of the decisions and the pathway that she's walked.
Students can expect to hear that hooking up is no big deal. The problem with that is that if you're a young person who believes that the proper context for sexual activity is marriage, and you have the idea that you want to wait until you're married, the pressure that you're under to conform is enormous. And so the idea that the college is providing a morally neutral environment where kids can do whatever they want, that's very misleading. That's not the case. The fact is that there is a prevailing ethos that they're expected to participate in. If you are committed to virginity until marriage, for example, you're the freak. And the kids who are, doing all kinds of other things, those are the kids who are considered normal and accepted and more or less supported by the adults in the environment.
How does a student then prepare themselves for this battleground? To some extent, it's simple, and yet it's also very difficult and complex. A student really needs to make sure that they have engaged themselves in authentic Christian fellowship. And what I mean by that, authentic Christian fellowship, it's not just meeting on Wednesday night with a campus group, singing some songs and having some brownies and maybe hearing a message. That's not authentic Christian fellowship. We're talking about the kind of fellowship where you can be honest, where there's an accountability, where there's this band of brothers kind of a thing, where there's this knit group of Christians who have a commitment that they are going to walk through this battle. And the other thing that I think is critically important is that a Christian student before they get to their campus, they need to have a Christian roommate selected. And they need to communicate with that Christian roommate. And then as soon as they get on campus, they've got to build that authentic Christian fellowship.
People tell me, what's true for you that's fine. It's not necessarily true for me. Whenever you criticize somebody or try telling them they're wrong, that's usually when that comes up.
You've got your truth, I've got my truth. Suppose that somebody said, well, in the cafeteria today, you better stay away from the tuna salad. It's gone bad, and 2 people have already gotten sick. What would you say? Well, that might be your truth, man, but maybe tuna salad that's gone bad is good for me. Of course we wouldn't do that. But when we're talking about right and wrong, and when we're talking about God, we do that. Somebody will say, well, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except by me. And I believe him, and I think it's true, and here's why. And somebody says, well, that's your truth, man, but I believe in my inner godhood. I believe I'm God deep down. The truth is, there either is a God or there isn't. What Jesus said about himself either is true or it isn't, and you've got to find out the truth. You may be attracted to something. Well, it's fun to believe this. But if it doesn't correspond to reality, you're in trouble. You need to know the truth. Your worldview has to have the same shape that reality does. A student came up to me one day after class, and he said, Professor, in class today, you were talking about morality. Come on, isn't it all just relative, he said. Isn't morality relative? Isn't it really different every place? How do we even know that murder is wrong? And I said to him, are you in any doubt about murder being wrong? And he said, well, some people might say that it's okay. And I said, yeah, but I'm not asking some people. I'm talking to you. Are you in any real doubt at this moment that murder, deliberately taking innocent human life, is wrong for everyone? And he hemmed and he hawed and he said, well, no, I guess I'm not. And I said, okay, well then, you're not really in doubt about relativism after all, are you? There's a moral common ground that's shared among all human beings. These principles are so deeply set in the human heart that you find some acknowledgement of them in every human culture, not just in our own. You go back thousands of years and you're going to still find families. You go back thousands of years and you're still going to find that people know that there's such a thing as marriage. You go back thousands of years and people know that it's wrong to deliberately take innocent human life. They may do it, as people in our society do. They might make excuses for it, as people in our society do, but they know that it's wrong. See, we know better than relativism. Somebody might say, theft and respect for other people's property, that's all socially determined and culturally determined and everything's all relative. But, but rip off his iPod and see what he says. You scratch a relativist and you find a moralist underneath. We use relativism selectively. When somebody does wrong to us, we're moralists. When we want to do something wrong and find an excuse, all of a sudden we say morality is relative.
Yeah, in college you hear the words experts and facts thrown around all the time, like they're ping pong balls. Kind of seems to me like it's an attempt to shut down arguments before they even come up. Now, I think people are people, and sometimes these experts can be as biased as anyone else and oftentimes wrong.
In 1929, Yale University economist Irving Fisher predicted that stock prices had reached, quote, what looks like a permanently high plateau. The next week, the stock market crashed, and within 3 years, the value of stocks had plunged by nearly 90%.
In the 1940s, technology experts were predicting that the computer of the future would be a lot smaller. In the words of Popular Mechanics magazine, computers might even have only 1,000 vacuum tubes and only weigh 1.5 tons.
Doctors in all parts of the country, doctors in every branch of medicine were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" In this nationwide survey of general practitioners, surgeons, throat specialists, diagnosticians, and so on, the brand named most was Camel.
In the 1950s, some leading medical experts were skeptical that smoking was a major factor in lung cancer. In the words of one researcher from the National Cancer Institute, if excessive smoking actually plays a role in the production of lung cancer, it seems to be a minor one.
Yes, according to this survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
In fact, it's a quite new discovery for us that the Earth can turn so cold so fast. The problem is, could that happen again to us right now? Or could we accidentally provoke such a catastrophe?
Unless we learn otherwise, it will be prudent to suppose that the next ice age could begin to bite at any time.
In the 1970s, there was a big scare about global cooling. Climate experts were worried that we might be headed towards a new global ice age. Time magazine reported in 1974 that, quote, "The atmosphere has been growing gradually cooler for the past 3 decades. The trend shows no indication of reversing." And Newsweek warned ominously that the cooling trend could lead to a drastic decline in food production, resulting in widespread starvation.
Now, according to Old Norse folklore, a summer that isn't summer at all, when the snow fails to melt, will signal the end of the world. Well, the new discoveries suggest that this myth is substantially correct.
Eugenics is a good example of how just trusting uncritically what the experts say without any critical questioning can lead to tragic human costs. Eugenics was the effort to breed a better human race using the principles of Darwinian biology. Darwin and his followers thought that we were counteracting the law of natural selection by helping people that nature would have killed off, like the mentally handicapped and the sick. And so therefore, you either had two choices. One would be go back to the law of the jungle and not care for people and just allow them to die, or reinstitute selection artificially by consciously choosing those who should survive and reproduce and those who shouldn't. And that really was the choice of the eugenics. And so you had things like forced sterilization and people segregated in institutions for the rest of their lives so they couldn't reproduce. And many of these people today we wouldn't consider mentally defective. Eugenics targeted often the poor, minorities, blacks, poor whites in Appalachia, and ended up really hurting a lot of people. Like, for example, Carrie Buck, who was a young woman in the 1920s in Virginia, and she was sterilized against her will because of a doctor who never even met her, checked her bloodlines, and determined that she must be defective. And so she was sterilized. Her case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court that said, yeah, this is something you can do. And yet today, Carrie Buck would be considered mentally handicapped. Eugenics was the consensus view of the scientific community for decades in America. It was promoted by people who were the leading evolutionary biologists at Princeton, Harvard, Columbia, Stanford, by members of the National Academy of Sciences. They all thought this was good science. Eugenics is really one of the most powerful examples of how dangerous it is just to accept blindly what the majority of experts say at any given time. If you are preparing to go to college, you've got to be willing to question. You've got to be willing to look at alternate explanations for things. You've got to be willing to look at the evidence for yourself and not just trust what someone tells you. Even someone who may be at a Christian college who may be a Christian, you can't just trust what they say. Christians throughout history have also been wrong.
One of the important reasons to learn about competing worldviews is not only so that you can defend your own or refine your own, but also so that you can understand wherever other people are coming from in the culture. Well, these are the most exciting questions a person could ever ask. You know, how did I get here? What's the ultimate reality? What is the thing from which everything else came? Is there a God or is there no God? I mean, these are fundamental questions. Every human being cares about the answers to these questions. I had a student once called them 4 o'clock in the morning questions. He always woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and thinking about the meaning of his life and where it was going. And the tragedy of American higher education is that all too often those fundamental questions are either not asked and addressed, or if they are asked, they are only answered from one point of view.
A lot of Christian kids really have a lot of those inner doubts about the fundamental issues of absolute truth, does God exist, the problem of evil, all those kind of things. That has to be settled in such a way that they are comfortable and confident to know that there is a plain answer to those questions. They also need to understand that there is a reason why the biblical Christian worldview is under attack. And that's not because of evidence. And that's what Romans 1 is saying to us so clearly. That what is known about God is plain to man because God has made it plain to them. But men suppress that truth because they want to do what they want to do.
If your beliefs are based only on private experience, you'll keep your beliefs in the private sphere. But if you have a confidence that your beliefs are based on publicly accessible evidences and good arguments based on those evidences, you will take your beliefs, your faith, into the public arena, and you will act on it in public, and you will begin to make a difference in the wider world.
Throughout high school, I had started praying a prayer, asking God to use me. And many times I felt that, why isn't He using me? And so as I continued to pray this prayer for almost 8 years before my senior year came along, it just made it even more evident to me that when you ask, you receive. I was unsure if I would actually receive that diploma, but I did. After I graduated, I was then looking for a job, but I was also preparing to file a lawsuit against my university. About 10 days after my lawsuit filed, the president of the university actually came out and made a public statement and said that the claims that I had brought up in my lawsuit were largely correct. And the outside evaluation team then came in and looked at that department and found that it was toxic. And many of the professors left. They didn't want to be a part of the solution. God used me. I got in a lot more trouble than I ever thought I would, but He used me.
I really believe that a high school student going into this environment, if they are prepared, and if they approach it with the wisdom and the winsomeness that I think God has called us to, that they can not only survive, but they can be a redeeming and reforming force that could have a huge impact on their professors and upon the students that they are engaging in that environment. I think settling for anything less than that is not understanding who we are in Christ. The battle that lies just ahead of you is real. Believe me, I hear the stories every day. And again, it's not as if every professor or every second of every day is going to be filled with attacks. But, if a tarantula jumps on your neck just once a week, that's significant. Some of this may be a little scary. That's actually good. You need to have a healthy fear of those things that can bring devastating consequences into your life. It is my deepest prayer that you do not end up on the casualty list with deep, deep regrets. But it is of greater importance for you to know that you can turn this battle into a joyful and triumphant time in your life. I am convinced that with the strength and wisdom and courage that comes from the Spirit of God, you will find yourself fulfilling what Paul said in Romans 8, that we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. But you must be prepared. 1 Peter 3:15 says this, But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. No one heads into the basketball season without going through intense training first. If you don't train, you lose. It's as simple as that. So we have developed a series of DVDs called True You that we believe will be of help to you in that preparation. The first set of DVDs will deal with the question regarding the existence of God and how you can have a firm confidence that our faith is not based upon a leap in the dark, but in reality has an abundance of evidence standing behind it. The second DVD will deal with the question of the Bible. What gives us confidence that the Scriptures are reliable and trustworthy? We will look at some of the newest archaeological discoveries and evidence from ancient documents and artifacts to help you understand why this book is like no other on the face of the planet, and why you can have a confidence that it truly is the Word of God. The third set of DVDs will deal with the question of Christ. Did he really claim to be God? Did he really rise from the dead? We will again examine recent archaeological discoveries and external evidence. We walk through one of the most fascinating and amazing studies, how everything was planned and orchestrated to converge at a single point in time, the appearance of Jesus of Nazareth. It could be one of the most eye-opening moments of your life. These first three DVDs will be like three legs of a stool. They will provide a critical foundation for you. The fourth set of DVDs will be like the seat on that stool. We will look at how you can engage with others in an effective and winsome manner, the importance of definitions, and how to recognize illogical arguments. We will walk through the big questions you will get hit with and how to respond to each. We will also deal with the heavy attack that you will get from campus life, the pull of the party scene, alcohol, drugs, and sex. And we're going to talk about the criticality of authentic fellowship with other believers, the deep importance of locking arms with a band of brothers, how to not only survive this battle, but to thrive, to be a world changer. But, you know, the bottom line is our desire to honor the Lord in the midst of the battle. 2 Timothy 2:15 says, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth." We are looking forward to walking through this preparation with you.